Um, Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for joining us for the inaugural podcast for the Culture and Civil Society Initiative at Harvard Kennedy School. We're grateful to have you join us and kick off this effort that's been more than a year in the making. And I want to start by sharing a bit about the impetus behind this effort and then open it up for a conversation between you and myself. As you know, Chris, I served as the mayor of Charlotte and then as U.S. Secretary of Transportation. And I was a Democrat, of course. And when I came to Harvard last fall, I wanted to spend my time trying to understand how to bridge some of the growing divisions I was seeing. So we started this project, interviewing those across the cultural space, trying to understand where people get their information and how the concept of culture has been swept up in the political divides we're seeing. So we've started this project and we're calling it the Culture and Civil Society Initiative, where we want to identify ways to harness the transformative power of culture and arts to combat political polarization and rejuvenate democratic societies. So today we start this conversation about cultural leadership and its interaction in our political frame with one of the luminaries here at Harvard and someone who can help us better understand the world we live in, my friend and a professor of the Kennedy School of Government, Chris Robichaud. I'm excited to introduce you, Chris. We sit two doors down from each other, and I've already become fast friends with you. You are an ethicist by training and a colleague here, as I said. You teach courses that range from being human, moral practices for public leadership, and of course, you teach in the field of ethics. So you've spent your time in research exploring how these philosophical questions arise in our pop culture and particularly the narratives of things even people won't believe this, even superheroes. You've written extensively about the Avengers and Spider-Man and X-Men and Game of Thrones and more. So your expertise in this arena, this intersection of culture and political culture, if you will, is incredibly relevant. So welcome, Chris.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be part of it.
I'm so excited to have you too. Look, have you ever been scuba diving, Chris?
I have not. I respect the deep of the ocean a little bit, maybe too much. Talking about culture. I've read way too many horror stories where the further down you go, those cute little things become some, H.P. Lovecraftian monstrosity that's been lurking down there for 3,000 years, ready to drive me insane. So see, that's the typical Chris Robichaud answer. No, it turns out I have been
Well,
scuba diving.
I've only done it. I've only done it like one time, but when I did do it, I noticed when I got down there in the water that everything there was more comfortable in the water than I was. So I figured it was probably not a great place for me to hang out. But what I did notice about it was the instructors would take you down a certain level, get your body used to it, and then they take you down another level and get your body used to it. So you go deeper and deeper that way. And I guess this conversation can kind of proceed in that way. Bringing people into the deep waters that you swim in. We want to maybe start a little more on the surface. And I guess the question is like, what is your description of what's happening in the world right now in terms of like people's perception? On the one hand, I go to like a football game and I see people cheering for the same team, and they're not necessarily thinking of themselves as Democrats or Republicans or conservatives or liberals or what have you, or movies or any type of cultural activity. And yet, when we start talking about politics and issues, it seems like people sort of separate into their sides, and it feels more tense. So can you describe how those two things kind of live together?
Yeah, well, I think to the latter point, tense and divided is definitely part of the story of American culture right now, and I think that extends outward to beyond our shores. To your first point, thank goodness we still, as Americans, and I'll speak from the American context simply because that's the one I'm most familiar with. I don't know, we want to be presumptive, but I do think such many of the things we say here today will apply to other countries as well. But from the American context, I'm happy that we can still come together over some things and find agreement. For instance, I'm sure that there's universal American agreement that the New York Yankees deserve to lose the World Series and the Dodgers, a
Let's
righteous
not talk
team.
about that.
But notice
You
what I've
cut
just
me
done here
deep
is
that time.
our agreements, even at these levels, are not as. My father raised me a Dodgers fan because he was a Brooklyn Dodgers fan when he served in the Navy. That's when he. So I was happy with that result. But
They're my second favorite team.
the Dodgers.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I'm a Yankees fan,
Are you a
so
Yankees
I
fan
was I
first
was
and
hurt.
foremost?
Yeah, I was
Okay.
hurt.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I mean, well, you've got what 26, 27 World
yeah,
Series. Yeah.
we
So
do okay. Yeah,
yeah.
actually, yeah.
But I'm glad that there are still some things we can talk still a little bit about shared TV moments. However, I will look. I'm a philosopher by training, so I sometimes do go more into doom and gloom than I want to. So we can feel free can drag me out of that at some point. However, I do think that there's something going on in our culture that we need to name. And I'm going to use your first question as an invitation to point to it, which is it is becoming harder to find these shared cultural experiences. And I don't necessarily think that has to do with politics, though politics does play a role in it. It has to do with technology and sort of the place that we're at. There is, for instance, I'm old enough to remember when everyone would talk about the made for TV series that was on some shit, like one of my favorite pop culture ones, V, which I don't know if you remember V, but it was the alien
Yeah.
people that came, and everyone watched V, everyone talked about V, everyone watched Thursday night sitcoms. We can talk about Cheers, Night Court, whatever. That's kind of all gone. We don't have as much of a shared experience anymore around sports, around television, around film. There's just so much of it that I do think it erodes more opportunities for us to come together. Even in the fighting sports, when I was a boy, when Mike Tyson just fought recently, I'd like to tell you I watched it, but I watched my screen pixelating instead. That's what I watched from Netflix. Thank you, Netflix. They released a response saying they still think most of us were happy with the viewing. I have some kind words for Netflix about that. I remember when everyone watched, for instance, the Tyson Sphinx fight. Like that was a big deal in the 80s. But even in the fighting sports, there's now like there's all this different stuff. My point is, I do think that one issue that troubles us or may be hard is it's harder to find this shared place where we can all agree. However, you're right. We do sometimes, put the politics aside, come together, and have a great experience. That said, sorry for the long answer to this.
No, it's good. No,
I do think that the political is invading all aspects of our life. And I go back and forth about whether I think that's just normal and inevitable and that's just the way life is, or if it's a symptom of the current moment, and by the current moment I mean over the past decade now that we're in. You can't the political invades what you're allowed to buy anymore, and I suppose it was always the case, but I can't keep up with it. Am I allowed to go to Chick-fil-A? Am I allowed to drink Bud Light? I can't keep up with the list of things I'm supposed to be buying or not
hmm
buying depending on my political allegiances. In sports, athletes have at times chosen to, make a political statement, from Colin Kaepernick taking a knee to just wearing, and we stand for this sort of thing on their uniforms. And that, rubs some people the wrong way. Film has always had, flirtations with the political and television entertainment as well. So I do wonder whether there's any sort of safe, quote unquote, safe arena where we can just pull apart the political and the cultural. My sense is if there was, that's diminishing. So to me, if there's going to be solutions, and I want to jump to solutions yet, it's going to have to be finding a way forward when our culture and our politics are inexorably intertwined.
responsible for this. This fragmentation you're describing didn't happen overnight. Is there a single source of responsibility here, or is it also fragmented?
Yeah, I'm always deeply suspicious myself of reductive explanations, single source explanations. People who study this much more intensely than me have lots of opinions. To me, it's a collection of a range of things. Some of it is technologically driven. It's just we've always been primed to locate ourselves into sort of our own comfortable spaces. And the birth of the internet from the 90s on has given us more and more ways to, protect ourselves. I'm putting quotes around that from hearing the other side. We can now build quite elaborate information bubbles, reinforcing bubbles where we don't have to, talk to people on the other side. We've always been disposed toward that. That's not new. We can just do it a lot easier now than we have before. I do think there's a historical story here, and the historical story is coming out of World War II. This country did come together and fight, in a devastating war, and coming onto the other side of it, there was more agreement than not on what the way forward was, even though I do think that glosses over some really profound disagreements that emerged along the way. But as you have the 60s and the 70s, as we have civil rights being fought for and women's rights being fought for, that created some tensions. And I still think I really like fantasy novels. And in fantasy novels, they'll have like a paragraph that says something like, and then 1,000 years passed. So I'm pretty comfortable talking about the long view. I still think we are very much in the Reagan era. We're in, I think, the last portion of a 40 plus year Reagan era response to what transpired from the Roosevelt era, which I would place from the New Deal all the way through the 70s. I think that's part of the story. Is the push for justice has caused some divisions. And now, the last thing I'll say on this is I think I would be fail as an ethicist if I didn't mention that increasing economic divisions and increasing economic anxiety has led to a lot of divisions. There's a lot of people who, the entirety of their lives, feel economically insecure, and understandably so. They feel that jobs went away because of global trade. They feel that they've been left out of work that's respected. That kind of anxiety leads to divisions. It leads to distrust. It leads to destructive tendencies. And we are still right in the midst of that. That has not been adequately addressed. There's very much a very high class of the upper echelon of 0.1% of people who have exorbitant amount of America's wealth and everyone else.
What do you, if you could put your finger on what American culture is, you know, let me preface my question by saying when I was a senior in high school, I traveled out of the country for the first time, and the Big Macs in France were a little different than they are in the U.S. People ate French fries with mayonnaise, which seemed a little weird to me. But it was the first time I could sort of look back at American culture objectively, or somewhat objectively. And I would suspect that many Americans don't have that opportunity to go outside of their own society and see another society, and to maybe reflect on where they come from. So I think we have a perennial challenge of sort of seeing our culture from the outside in. But if you could describe it, how would you describe it?
That's a great question. I Ask me what day of the week is it today. Today I have a different answer than I do on other days. I think there are some things that words people first talk about when they talk about American culture, the kind of rugged individualism. And I think to some extent that's true. Culturally speaking, we still envision ourselves as rugged individualists. I think we see that about each one of us. I think that we see that sometimes as our place in the world. American culture does, for better or worse, have a sense of uniqueness and a sense of we're all about the individual, and we're going to do it our way.
Hmm.
The old, I mean, it's all mythology. A lot of this is just mythology, but the old Western, we're going out and going into the great wilds and sort of carving out a piece of it for ourselves. I think that that's very much a part of American culture. I still think it is a part of American culture. This idea that anyone can make it. As I said, what I said just previously is that cultural attitude runs up against reality in some pretty stark ways. But I still think that we envision ourselves as the kind of culture where anyone can make it. We have a complicated relationship with the American culture that I like, which is very diverse and says these are open shores. We welcome everyone. We don't care if, we're not a titled country where you have Sir so and so. If we use Sir, we use it, um, either just a general term of respect, as you'll get like, in southern states, or something of irony. Well, we don't have royalty, at least in the official sense. We have Hollywood. We have all the rest of it. So I kind of like the American culture that is, we don't stand on ceremony. We go about it our own ways. We're rugged individuals. We welcome everyone. But Anthony, there's parts of our culture too that I think our culture is mixed. Like I think we are a violent culture too. I think we are aggressive. I think I can't help but mention some things that I don't like seeing, like how many times we shoot each other everywhere. Grocery stores, synagogues, churches, schools, the post office. We are prone to violent outbursts at times, and we and I think that and we can be bullies. And I think that internationally people view us sometimes as bullies with a sense of self-righteousness, which can be an extremely dangerous combination. This is my way of saying, and I'll wrap this up by saying that I don't think culture in and of itself is good or bad. And to me, it's usually a mixed bag. And one thing that we can always ask is, what are the parts of our culture that we really like and want to embrace and want to lean in on? And what are the parts of our culture where we might be able to say, look, we're not doing so great here.
Mhm.
We're in some trouble, and we should uh, we should revisit this. I lied. One last thing on this is like that rugged individualism. I love until I don't. And by that I mean I love the rugged individualism, but to the extent that it turns us over time into cynics and nihilists and have no sense of public service or public community or we're in this together, it can truly be quite coercive. So I think the task of us is try to find those that the good kernels in some of our cultural elements, but also to do it eyes wide open about how some of these things can lead to some badness along the way.
Is there a difference in your mind between like what people might, and now we're starting to get a little deeper into the water here, by the way, for those listening, but is there a difference between like popular culture and high art in your mind?
I like blurring the lines. I like high art that is of Campbell's soup cans. Warhouse. You know, I every time you try to put your finger on a definition that distinguishes these things, I'm pretty skeptical of them. I think that there can be, for example, high art that's widely accessible and says things to the human condition, and I'm a huge proponent of public facing high art in this sense, throwing the doors open to symphonies, throwing the doors open to the art museums, throwing the doors open to literature and libraries and all these things. But at the same time, and I enjoy that, but my bread and butter, I'm a kid of the 80s, is popular entertainment. I was raised on Spielberg and Star Wars
Mhm.
and superheroes, and I feel that these have often been unduly maligned by certain corners of the profession, as saying there's nothing there that's really worth sort of examining as art. It's just popcorn entertainment, and I think sometimes popular art is just popcorn entertainment. But I think that we would be missing something profound if we didn't look right, scratch right underneath the surface and see some interesting stuff going on there. If I may give an example, right? Sometimes the popular arts, in my opinion, are the first place where you see a culture wrestling with itself and its issues. And it's only downstream when you see that being done on paintings hung in walls. So to me, it's no accident. I've used this example for years now, but it's no accident to me that two of the biggest tentpole superhero movies of 2016, one coming out in March and one coming out in May, were movies about superheroes fighting each other. These were two. This is Marvel Civil War, Captain America Civil War, and the other one was Batman versus Superman. And these were the big movies, superhero movies of the year, right before the 2016 election. Rather than fighting some outside baddie, the story is mostly them fighting each other. Batman and Superman spend an exorbitant amount of time punching each other in the face. How Batman gets away with that is a different question. Until they both realize in this insane moment that I'll still never forgive folks for, like that both of their mother's name was Martha, and suddenly that changes the dynamic of everything. Don't get me started on this, right? I can't handle it, right? Um, but and then in Marvel Civil War, there's what's fascinating to me about that is there's a real philosophical and interesting division between the Avengers. Like, do we give the public oversight over us? That's Team Tony Stark, or do we trust in our own sort of moral standing? That's Captain America. They can't reach an agreement, so they punch each other in the face for the second half of the movie. Here's, in other words, a culture. I mean, popcorn entertainment. At some level, you can just enjoy these movies as superheroes doing crazy superhero things. But right underneath the surface, you see an American culture saying, "What's happening to us? Our heroes, we're villainizing each other." And we're not resolving this. Not really. Both movies end somewhat ambivalently, and Batman versus Superman less than Marvel Civil War. Marvel Civil War ends pretty ambivalently about like if there's a way forward for the Avengers after this.
And so I'm now going into the deepest part of the waters here because I'd like to contrast what you were just talking about with the Avengers and the Batman versus Superman. I'm going to Star Wars, the original Star Wars, which is sort of follows Joseph Campbell's sort of formulation of a hero story. And it seems to be a story of, sort of the underdog having this very special talent and it sort of surfacing and being unearthed by a mentor and ultimately a story of transcendence. Were we telling different stories in a previous era about heroes that were heroic in a sense versus heroes who were fighting unwinnable battles?
It's such a great question, Anthony. I think we certainly tell different stories of heroes at different times and places. To me, one of the most powerful moments, to me as a kid, the most powerful moment in Star Wars comes in Return of the Jedi. And it's hard for me saying that because I got to put on my geek card. We all know that Empire Strikes Back is the greatest of them. I'll never forgive Lucas for the Ewoks. He wanted to sell a lot of action figures. God bless you, George Lucas. I love you. I will always owe you so much, but the Ewoks just didn't do it. All right, but okay. Now that the ground has been cleared, right? Um, the temptation of Luke in the Emperor throne room with Luke Vader in there. I remember as a kid, to me, the most powerful moment. Speaking about heroes and what lessons, you named a really good lesson about mentorship, but to me, one of the big leadership moments in that was the Emperor showing Luke that he outsmarted everyone. And he really did. I mean, the story doesn't lean into just how well the Emperor succeeded in that front, but he really did. He trapped the rebellion. Luke is watching them being torn apart. Luke is watching his friends, he thinks he's watching his friends being destroyed. And the Emperor's just waiting for it. He's just waiting for it. And Luke takes his lightsaber and Vader's like prodding him. His dad's prodding him. He's like, if I can't change you, I'll change Leia. Luke loses it, grabs his lightsaber, is wailing on his dad, and is one step away from killing his father. And we see that. We see that in Luke's eyes. And I'm there for it, Anthony. I'm like, yeah, take him down. Screw this. I'm tired. And then Luke does this thing. He's like, no. He takes his lightsaber and he throws it down. He says, I'm a Jedi, like my father before. Very powerful moment. And I was like, what? At the moment, I was like, wait a minute, you were going to beat Vader. But that wasn't the lesson. The lesson was he's not playing the Emperor's game. He's not going to play what the game the Emperor wants. The only way to beat the Emperor, and later novels and books and comic books, and I read it all, God help me, right? Really lean in on this. The Emperor couldn't be beaten with force. He had to be beaten that way. So the Emperor tries to destroy Luke and misses the one thing. The Emperor misses the one thing. This is another lesson that he never could understand, which is Vader was never completely on board. And his love for his son, at the end of the day, undid the Emperor, at least for a time being. That is very powerful. That is a very powerful lesson about force and not the use of force, about not playing into the worst elements of our nature. The Emperor needs us to be the worst version of ourselves. And to the extent that we are the worst version of ourselves, the Emperor stays in power. It was only when Luke transcended that the Emperor was destroyed. At least ... for a while. Because Anthony, I'm sorry for going up, but like there's a new. Star Wars is an interesting place. Once you look at the expanded franchise, you see a story that I think says something important to our moment, if I may. Mm-hmm. And the story is, I see us, as I mentioned before, as very divided, and I see both the political left and the political right really aiming at trying to destroy each other. And after the most recent election, the political right has won. It has won in a major way. It has won tremendous power. And I do believe that power will be used to punish the political left. But the annoying thing to the right is going to be the thing that annoys the political left as well, because the political left, many of the students that I taught for some years now told themselves a story, which is once you just secure the ongoing demographics of the United States, the right will never have a place here. They'll be able to just sort of wash over it. The lesson is neither of us are going to destroy each other. The Catholics and the Protestants tried to destroy each other for hundreds of years. Eventually, they realized it's not happening. We have to figure out how to live together. Weirdly, I don't think Star Wars had this in mind, but weirdly, the Star Wars story as it's expanded is this message. The Emperor was stopped, but he really wasn't stopped. He comes back, and they have to stop him again. But of course, this is the cycle. The Emperor thought he destroyed all the Jedi. He didn't. They come back. They thought that they destroyed the Emperor. He didn't. He came back. It's a really interesting Star Wars story, but if I were writing one, it would be the Sith and the Jedi sit down at a table together and figure out that they're just both going to have to exist in this galaxy far, far away together. And this not constant back and forth just ain't going to cut it. But that Star Wars story, I don't think I'm going to be having Hollywood knocking down my door to write that the Star Wars script anytime soon.
Well, it's an interesting segue to the question of how all of this ties into what you do every day and what I do, which is you spend a lot of time trying to help students understand leadership, helping them understand how to solve very difficult public problems. And so what does all this culture have to tell us about that? I mean, you've kind of alluded to it, but how can it inform the thinking and teaching?
I myself find that as much as I'm an egghead philosopher, the real important lessons, I think, of ethics and of political philosophy, they live in people's hearts more than they live in people's minds. Now, I think that we need to think, we need to reason. I'm an old school Enlightenment person when it comes to that. But if you don't find the heart as well, then you're in trouble. And culture speaks to the heart. So I could, to give you, to take this back to superhero example, I could offer my students article upon article upon article about what it is to have integrity, what does integrity involve, what is it to have a set of moral principles that you hold on to. And I think that's important. But I don't think that's all mental, right? That has to be part of it. But then I can show them The Dark Knight, when, to me, I think maybe the greatest superhero movie of all time, even though now it's some years old. And I can show them the Joker, and I can tell them, look, and by the way, I do this in my classes. I show The Dark Knight. And the Joker for the second half of this movie, like, what's the Joker's plan? Is it to take over Gotham? Is it to take over the world? Ha ha ha, cackling supervillain. Like, no, the Joker's plan is to get Batman to break his one rule. Batman has one rule. He doesn't kill people. Look, that's the only rule he has. He tortures them. He throws them all around. He kidnaps them. He spies on them. It ain't great, really. But he does have this one rule, which is he doesn't kill people. And the whole second half of the movie is the Joker just seeing if he can get Batman to break that one rule. And so now I can take a movie like that, a cultural event in Dark Knight, and I can have a conversation about the idea that our integrity is only meaningful when it doesn't matter if it's easy to do this. We find out who we really are. This is the Joker's whole thing. When we are pushed, that's when we find out who we're. The Joker at the end is, I'm sorry to spoil the movie for those who haven't seen it, but it was 2008, and to me, it's like, but at the end when Batman's throwing the Joker over the ledge, the Joker's laughing on his way down because he thinks Batman finally got him. He finally got Batman to kill him, and Batman rescues him, and ties him up. And the Joker's incredulous. He's like, you won't kill me, will you? He's like, I can't believe it. That to me is a very powerful lesson that culture can plant in our hearts in a way that I think merely the academic study of some of these things is never going to accomplish.
You watch a movie like you're just describing and not be changed by it.
Absolutely. We unfortunately, right? There's lots of artistic intervention, some intentional, some not, where people watch it and they're like, that's interesting. And it goes sort of in one ear and out the other. And that is what it is, Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit is a deep and powerful intervention in the civil rights movement. But for many people, just a beautiful, mournful song. And they can listen to it as a beautiful, mournful song out of context, and it won't change their perception on things. I actually think that's okay, because, I think that, art needn't affect everyone exactly the same way. If it's good, if it's powerful, if it's interesting, it'll stick around for a while and always be available for transformation. But different folks will respond to different things, you know, as they are so constituted.
The late great Quincy Jones had
Yes,
had one request of several American presidents, and it was to establish a cabinet agency devoted to culture. Good idea, not a good idea. What do you think?
I love it in principle, though I'm hesitant to create more cabinet seats these days. Or I don't know if we're going to get the cabinet. I don't even know if we get the cabinet seats that exist these days. But um, I think there's something very powerful to this idea that American culture is very powerful, and to not have government of the people and by the people sort of recognize that in a more formal capacity. I've always been a bit uncomfortable with federal government's relationship to the arts. It'll send it some money, but it always seems to be second guessing. That's almost the first thing to go on budgets and all the rest of it. It's sometimes just the fine arts, and it's not more popular entertainment. I guess this is a long way of me saying that I think that culture is what we live and breathe. The challenge to me, if I may be blunt, is since everything is politicized now. If we're at a point where we can politicize things like, Anthony, your Department of Transportation, if that could be politicized, to me the Department of Culture would be the very first thing that would be a centerpiece for the quote unquote culture wars that we keep fighting. So I don't know if it would end up at the end of the day being something powerful and beautiful, or just a lightning rod for grievances on multiple fronts from different political tribes.
To maybe further this question of like the public role with respect to culture and art, like what's the prescription? Like what should there just be more films, more music, more outputs that sort of get into this space of building bridges for us? What do you how does culture help us as an American society figure a way forward?
I think part of it, and this is an incomplete answer, but it's the answer that I've been pounding on the table on recently. We need to learn how to consume culture in responsible and interesting ways. We need to learn a lot. Um, I would want to see better education around how to watch films, read books, listen to music. In other words, let me explain what I'm saying. We don't need any training at all to sit in front of a TV and enjoy stuff, right? But I needed to learn over time from various people on how to watch a film and see what it might be doing besides what's right there in my face. In the choices of lighting, in the choices of pacing, in the choices of the music. Even comic books, I'm a kid, I'm reading comic books. I don't need any training on how to read a comic book. But over time you talk to other comic book readers, and they help. When I say, education doesn't have to be within like a formal school setting, but you need they're like, look at what's going on between the panels. Look at this artist's decision to frame this panel from up above or from below. Look at all these decisions were made. That's part of the storytelling too. So I think that if, for culture to have a real impact, if it's going to have an impact beyond the sort of deep subconscious, we should have more conversation around it. We should have more education around it. And again, I want to emphasize that education needn't come from stuffy professors, though it could. Here's a shout out to stuffy professors, right? But it needs to we need to be taught how to engage it in an impactful way, or else it is just background noise. Nothing makes me sadder than someone who tells me that they're listening to a great American novel
Mm.
as just background noise. And there's nothing pretentious about that. It's just the opposite. I mean, this is like, stop and just listen to it on its own terms, and then jog, because the words are there for a reason, and we're missing them if we're not just if it's all just sort of noise, constant onslaught of noise and information filtering over our eyes and into our ears. There's no engagement. In other words, there's just we're just being washed over with it. And if you don't engage art, then culture won't benefit from its production, whether it's pop art or other kinds of highbrow art.
One of the subjects you and I have talked about and we'll be talking about further individually is just educational institutions like the one we both spend most of our time at. And their role in society. If you think of educational institutions as a cultural force, and you've thought about how a place like Harvard should show up in the world. You want to talk about that a little bit? Just, you're from the Midwest, I'm from the South, and places like Harvard can seem 1,000 miles away, and probably are, I guess, literally for some of these places. But there does seem to be a bit of a perception divide between the relative importance attributed to some of these elite institutions, and the degree to which they're either helping or perhaps even harming society. So can you talk a little bit about how you think about it and some of the things you're kicking around?
Well, I think that there's a massive, I'll put it the way that folks like to talk these days. There's a massive PR failure on behalf of universities and the American public. And it is now sort of reaching a crescendo, but it was there. We saw the seeds of it for some time. And I think there's plenty of blame to go around. So I'll focus on the blame that I think universities have taken upon themselves. Universities have not, I think, done a good job of reaching out to the public and explaining their own value and making the case for the kind of academic freedom we enjoy here. For instance, recently in the past couple of days, there's been this discussion around the possible appointment of RFK and Health and Human Services, and an attitude about shutting down funding for what appears to be extremely esoteric scientific investigations into this insect or that sort of thing. And of course, people, in my circles, academia, people will be like, "How what foolishness!" Though they understand that when you investigate, I don't know the details. When you investigated this, insects, biology, from that we can draw a line to this life-saving vaccine. But the point is, it was somewhat on us to make that case, to explain that sometimes the unimpeded pursuit of knowledge goes nowhere, but sometimes the unimpeded pursuit of knowledge goes to some great and amazing places. We haven't made the case that tolerating people who say in academia absolutely, in my view, lunatic things
Mm.
is the price you get for an environment that is actually struggling at trying to find out, a better way to live and a way to move forward. We are extremely closed off and insular. And to talk about high art, before I share with you some of my thoughts that we've chatted about how to improve this, I just read earlier this year, because I got the sense of this well before the outcome of this election, Herman Hesse's last novel, the one that he won the was it Pulitzer or Nobel Prize for, I'm forgetting which one, The Glass Bead Game, which is his only science fiction futuristic novel. It doesn't feel very science fiction-y, but it's all about, a country that has sort of created this sort of little mini capital of academics who are doing their academic thing, and they play this glass bead game. And there's no function to the glass bead game other than enjoyment of itself. But really, the whole novel is about academic this esoteric academic world in relation to a society that is increasingly skeptical of its worth. I think that everyone should read The Glass Bead Game now, in particular. I myself have always felt, and my entire career has been based around this idea, I myself have always felt that philosophy, the discipline I love, the subject matter I love, is wasted if becoming a professional in this discipline just positions you to talk to other philosophers. I have
Mm.
always felt that the beauty of the humanities and of philosophy, my area, is best served by reaching out into the public. And so I've always tried to take down some of the barriers and open this up more. I collaborated with Stan Lee and Michael and David Uslan on contributing to a superheroes course on the history of superheroes. I offered my own superheroes and philosophy course, a version of it, free through the Smithsonian. And it really was in the spirit of, look, we should be able to be more open. I think that Harvard needs to do more good faith, sincere public outreach. We live in a world in which Zoom is real. We're not unfamiliar with the idea of you don't have to be there. Why are we not offering some free courses to anyone who wants to take them and who could benefit from it? Why so many barriers? There's more than enough courses to go around. I think that only by showing folks what you can get out of a classroom when done well can the value of this institution, the institution of academia, really thrive. So I would be an advocate for any and all efforts, and sign me up for being a part of them, that does this. I think if academia is purely defensive, and if we continue to just tell people that you should know how valuable we are, we deserve what's coming if that's going to be the attitude.
Thank you for that. I want to maybe end with a question that goes about as deep into political philosophy as I'm capable. I'm no match for you on this. But I remember in college I was reading Leviathan and was struck just by how Hobbes was like so convinced that people were basically like at each other's throats and took like a strong intervention by someone to sort of keep people from being at each other's throats. And contrast that with like an African philosophy, Ubuntu, which is like, I am because we are. And from a certain lens, that latter philosophy can be seen as a weakness, and the other could be seen as a strength. And I guess the question is, how do we reconcile the reality? As you talked about American culture, there is this sort of, there's a generosity in the American spirit, there's a certain pride in the American spirit. There's also rugged individualism and a sense of, maybe even an undercurrent of violence that has marked our history and even our present. So are those unchangeable realities that make it impossible for a more collaborative, cooperative sort of spirit to sort of overtake us? Or, where do we go from here? As a philosopher, what do you think?
I think the good news is, maybe I'll start with, I think Hobbes is wrong. I taught a course at Harvard Extension School some years ago called Utopia and Dystopia in Fiction and
Mm,
Philosophy. And we read
mm,
some Hobbes, and then we looked at Mad Max Fury Road. And I was like, Mad Max Fury Road is very Hobbesian in the sense that when you look at post-apocalyptic literature, I think is the best literary lens to look at what people think we're like when you remove all the niceties that keep us playing a certain way. And if Hobbes is right, then we get something like Mad Max Fury Road. We get an absolute hellscape. But I think that there's a mountain of ever growing work in moral psychology which suggests, well, we would not have survived this long if we were wholly destructive like Hobbes imagined. Let's not sugarcoat our vast propensity for destruction. But that is only one side of it. What gives human beings a great evolutionary advantage is our amazing capacity to cooperate with each other and to coordinate with each other in ways that the envy of the world. I mean, other animals do this to some extent, but the reason why we're running the show, as it were, for better or worse, is we've done it better than anyone else. So we do have profound capacity to cooperate, and we have profound capacity to destroy each other. Interestingly, the two are tied up. The very things that bring us together into collective units of cooperation also make us villainize and otherize the other groups, and thus the wars are started. Culture can get us to bring out the better natures of ourselves, the better angels of our nature, rather than the worst. So too can external events. Unfortunately, nothing brings a people together than a serious outside threat. I don't think it's an accident, Anthony, that one of the if not the greatest superhero graphic novel of all time, Watchmen, has as its main idea that Ozymandias, the quote unquote smartest man in the world, a superhero, his solution for solving humanity's problem. This was written during the 80s when there was a real threat again of nuclear war.
mm.
His solution was to, in the comic book, this is different than the movies, fake an alien invasion. Fake an alien invasion so that people would be like, we need to stop fighting each other because there's this thing out there. Ozymandias' scheme is a little bit problematic, to say the very least, but the thought is external threats can bring us together. But I don't think my more hopeful moments, I sometimes allow them to come through. My more hopeful moments is that we don't necessarily need that. Less hopeful, but more realistic, I think, is something I alluded to before. So I'll lean on Jedi and Sith again.
Mm.
We may just need to fight amongst ourselves long enough to realize at the end of the day that we've caused each other tremendous pain, and after all of it, it's a draw. And continuing to go on this way is silly. And I think culture can get us, I think more culture that emphasizes that mutually assured destruction is not really cool, and that in most stories, there's always good and bad. I think that can be very, very, very powerful. One last thing is, the African philosophy you pointed to is extremely powerful. And um, I believe that culture can also remind us of the preciousness of our community, even when we are disappointing each other and angry with each other. I'm really disappointed and angry with the portion of this country right now. I'm not going to hide that. To me, that would be the height of insincerity and ridiculousness. My heart's broken. I also understand that from their perspective, their heart's been broken by me for quite some time. And we're just going to have to find a way to stumble through together. Or there's a zombie apocalypse, and that takes care of it all right there. Yeah.
Chris Robichaud, you're one of my favorite people. I can't thank you enough for joining us on this inaugural podcast for the Culture and Civil Society Initiative, and look forward to many more conversations.
I look forward as well. Thanks so much for having me on, Anthony. This has been a true joy. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.